Tales from the Dark Objects. Story 1. The Haunted Doll. It was a cold, dark night when the old man stumbled upon the haunted doll. He was wandering through the abandoned town looking for antiques to add to his collection when he saw a faint light in the distance. He followed the light until he reached an old abandoned house, its windows broken and its doors creaking in the wind. The old man pushed open the door, and his flashlight shone on a small, porcelain doll sitting on a dusty shelf. Its eyes seemed to follow him as he approached it. The old man reached out to pick up the doll when suddenly, the room grew colder, and a chill ran down his spine. The doll's eyes seemed to glow, and the old man felt a presence in the room. He quickly put the doll back on the shelf and ran out of the house, feeling like he was being watched the entire time. As he drove back to his home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake by leaving the doll behind. The next day, he returned to the abandoned house, but the doll was nowhere to be found. He searched high and low but came up empty-handed. He returned home, feeling uneasy and disturbed. That night, the old man was awakened by a strange noise coming from his collection room. He got out of bed and went to investigate, but when he entered the room, he was shocked to see the porcelain doll sitting on a shelf, its eyes once again glowing in the dark. The old man was terrified, but he couldn't bring himself to touch the doll. Instead, he backed out of the room and locked the door, hoping that he was just imagining things. But as the days passed, strange things began to happen in the house. Objects would move on their own, and the old man would hear footsteps in the hallway at night. He knew that he had to get rid of the doll, but he was too afraid to touch it. One night, as the old man was lying in bed, he heard a strange whispering coming from the collection room. He got out of bed and cautiously opened the door. As he approached the doll, he saw that its eyes were now glowing a bright red. Suddenly, the doll lunged at him, and the old man felt an intense pain in his chest. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for air as the doll seemed to take control of his body. The old man was now possessed by the haunted doll. The possessed old man began to terrorize the small town where he lived. He would walk the streets at night, his eyes glowing red as he searched for new victims. People would hear him whispering to himself, but when they turned to look, no one was there. One night, a young girl was walking home from school when she saw the possessed old man walking towards her. She tried to run, but the old man caught up to her and grabbed her by the arm. She screamed for help, but no one came. The old man dragged the young girl back to his house and locked her in the collection room. The girl was never seen again. People in the town began to talk about the haunted doll and the possessed old man. They knew that something had to be done, but they were too afraid to confront the old man. One day, a group of brave individuals decided to take matters into their own hands. They went to the old man's house armed with holy water, crosses, and other religious artifacts. As they approached the house, they could hear the old man whispering to himself. They kicked down the door and rushed into the collection room, where they found the possessed old man sitting in front of the haunted doll, its eyes still glowing red. The group of individuals began to perform an exorcism on the old man, calling upon the power of God to expel the evil spirit from his body. As they chanted and prayed, the old man's body began to shake, and he let out a terrifying scream. Suddenly, the haunted doll began to move on its own. Its head turned towards the group, and its eyes seemed to glow brighter than ever before. The group knew that they had to focus all their energy on exorcising the doll as well as the old man. As they continued to pray, the doll began to levitate off the shelf, its small body contorting and twisting in the air. The group knew that they had to act fast, and they began to sprinkle holy water on the doll. As soon as the holy water touched the doll, it let out a blood-curdling scream, and its eyes stopped glowing. The doll fell to the ground, lifeless. The possessed old man also fell to the ground, his body no longer under the control of the evil spirit. The group of individuals quickly rushed him to the hospital, where he was treated for his injuries. After the exorcism, the haunted doll and the possessed old man were never seen again. The town returned to its normal quiet state, and people tried to forget the horror that had occurred. But the memory of the haunted doll lingered in the minds of the townspeople. They knew that they had come face to face with an evil that they could not explain, and they were grateful that they had been able to overcome it. The old man's collection room was sealed off, and no one ever entered it again, but some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the old man's whispers and the faint sound of the haunted doll's screams. The haunted doll had been exorcised, but its legacy would continue to haunt the town for years to come. Despite the exorcism, rumors and stories of the haunted doll continued to circulate throughout the town. Some people claimed that they had seen the doll in their dreams, while others swore that they had heard its eerie laughter echoing in their homes. As time went on, the town began to attract more and more curious visitors who were eager to learn about the haunted doll. The old man's collection room became a popular spot for ghost hunters and thrill seekers, who would often break into the sealed-off room to try and catch a glimpse of the doll. But every time someone entered the room, they would report strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, strange whispers in the air, and the feeling of an unseen presence watching them. Despite the warnings and the strange occurrences, people continued to flock to the old man's house. It became a hotspot for paranormal activity, and many people claimed that they had seen the haunted doll wandering around the property, its red eyes glowing in the darkness. One night, a group of teenagers broke into the old man's house. Determined to find the haunted doll for themselves, they made their way through the dark, eerie rooms of the house, feeling as if they were being watched every step of the way. Finally, they reached the sealed-off collection room. With a crowbar, they broke open the door, and they stepped inside, their flashlights illuminating the dark corners of the room. And then they saw it, the haunted doll, sitting on a shelf, its eyes glowing red once again. The teenagers gasped in horror, frozen in place by the sight of the evil doll. Suddenly, the doll's head snapped towards them, and it let out a piercing scream. The room filled with a bright red light, and the teenagers felt as if they were being pulled towards the doll. They screamed and ran towards the door, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped inside with the haunted doll, and there was nowhere to run. The doll continued to scream and thrash on the shelf, its small body contorting and twisting in the air. The teenagers tried to fight back, but they were no match for the power of the evil spirit. As the night wore on, the screams and cries of the teenagers grew fainter and fainter, until there was only silence. The haunted doll had claimed its latest victims, and the town was left to mourn the loss of its young residents. In the end, the old man's house was demolished, and the land was left to lay barren. No one wanted to risk the chance of the haunted doll returning, and the memory of the horror that had occurred there was too much to bear. But some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the sound of the haunted doll's screams, echoing through the empty fields where the old man's house once stood, and the memory of the haunted doll continues to haunt the town to this day. Story 2. The Ghost at the Attic. It was an old, creaky house, with peeling paint and a roof that looked as if it might cave in at any moment. But it was the only house available, and so the Johnson family moved in. hoping to start a new life in the small town. As they began to unpack their boxes, they noticed that there was a strange smell in the air. It was a musty, damp smell, as if something had been rotting for years. But they shrugged it off, thinking that it was just the old house's musty smell. As they explored the house, they discovered an old, rickety staircase leading up to the attic. The door to the attic was locked, but they could hear strange noises coming from behind it, creaking, shuffling, and whispering sounds. The family dismissed the noises, thinking that they were just the sounds of an old house settling, but they couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strange going on in the attic. One night, the family was awakened by a loud, piercing scream. They raced up to the attic, but the door was still locked, and there was no sign of anyone inside. As the days went on, the strange occurrences continued. The family would hear footsteps in the attic, and sometimes they would even hear the sound of someone whispering their names. The youngest daughter, Emily, began to have nightmares about a ghostly figure that she claimed was lurking in the attic. She described the figure as a tall, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. At first, the family thought that Emily was just being imaginative, but one night, they decided to investigate the attic themselves. As they climbed the creaky stairs, they could feel their hearts pounding in their chests. The door to the attic was still locked, but they could hear the sound of someone shuffling around inside. With a deep breath, the father unlocked the door and pushed it open, and there, in the middle of the room, was a figure tall, shadowy, and with glowing red eyes. The family tried to run, but they found that they were rooted to the spot. The figure began to approach them, its long fingers reaching out to touch them. And then, suddenly, it vanished into thin air. The family was left standing in the empty attic, shaking and terrified. After that night, the family decided to move out of the old house. They never discovered what was causing the strange occurrences in the attic, but they knew that they didn't want to stay around to find out. Years went by, and the old house remained abandoned. People in the town would often tell stories about the ghost in the attic, and some claimed to have seen the figure themselves. One day, a group of teenagers decided to break into the old house and investigate the attic for themselves. They climbed the creaky stairs, feeling the same sense of dread that the Johnson family had felt all those years ago. As they pushed open the door to the attic, they were met with the same musty, damp smell that the Johnsons had described. And then, they saw it, the tall, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. The teenagers tried to run, but they found that they couldn't move. The figure approached them, its fingers reaching out to touch them. And then, just as suddenly as before, it vanished into thin air. The teenagers were left standing in the empty attic, shaken and terrified. After that night, the old house was demolished. People in the town stopped talking about the ghost in the attic, but some say that on quiet nights, you can still hear the sound of someone shuffling around upstairs, and the memory of the ghost in the attic continues to haunt the town to this day. Some say that the spirit of the tall, shadowy figure still lingers in the town, seeking revenge on those who dare to enter the old house. Years later, a group of urban explorers decided to investigate the abandoned town. They had heard the stories of the ghost in the attic and were determined to find out if they were true. As they walked through the empty streets, they could feel the weight of the town's dark history. The old house still stood, looming over the other buildings like a dark shadow. The group of explorers made their way to the old house, determined to explore the attic and find out once and for all if the ghost in the attic was real. As they climbed the creaky stairs, They could feel their hearts pounding in their chests. The musty, damp smell of the attic filled their noses, and they could hear the sound of someone shuffling around inside. The door to the attic was locked, but the explorers had come prepared. They quickly picked the lock and pushed the door open. And there, in the middle of the room, was the tall, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. The explorers tried to run, but they found that they couldn't move. The figure approached them, its fingers reaching out to touch them. But then, something strange happened. The figure seemed to hesitate, as if unsure of what to do, and then it vanished into thin air. The explorers were left standing in the empty attic, shaking and terrified. They had seen the ghost in the attic, and they knew that they never wanted to come back to the old house again. As they made their way out of the town, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. They felt as if they were being followed, and they could hear the sound of someone shuffling behind them. And then, just as suddenly as before, the feeling vanished. The explorers were left standing in the empty street, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had seen the ghost in the attic, and they knew that they would never forget the feeling of terror that had filled them that night. From that day on, the old town remained abandoned. No one ever ventured back there, and the memory of the ghost in the attic continued to haunt the town for years to come. Some say that the spirit of the tall, shadowy figure still lingers in the town, seeking revenge on those who dared to enter the old house. And the memory of the ghost in the attic continues to live on, a reminder of the town's dark and haunted past. The legend of the ghost in the attic spread throughout the region, and many people began to share their own stories of strange occurrences and unexplained happenings in the old town. One man claimed that he had seen the ghostly figure standing outside the old house, its glowing red eyes staring back at him. Another woman reported hearing strange noises coming from the attic, even though the house had been abandoned for years. As time went on, the legend of the ghost in the attic grew even more frightening. Some claimed that the spirit had become restless and was now seeking revenge on anyone who dared to enter the old town. Despite the warnings, some brave souls still attempted to explore the abandoned town, but each time, they were met with strange and terrifying occurrences, leaving them shaken and terrified. And then, one day, a group of paranormal investigators arrived in the town, determined to uncover the truth about the ghost in the attic. Armed with state-of-the-art equipment and years of experience, they set out to explore the old house and the surrounding area. As they made their way through the abandoned town, they could feel the weight of the ghostly presence all around them. Strange noises echoed through the empty streets, and they could hear the sound of shuffling footsteps coming from the old house. When they finally reached the attic, they were greeted by an eerie sight. The room was shrouded in darkness, and a thick fog seemed to fill the air. In the center of the room stood the ghostly figure, its glowing red eyes fixed on the investigators. The team of paranormal experts tried to communicate with the spirit, but they were met with only silence. They attempted to record the ghostly presence, but their equipment malfunctioned, and the footage was lost. And then, just as suddenly as before, the ghostly figure vanished into thin air. The investigators were left standing in the empty attic, their hearts pounding in their chests. But as they made their way out of the old town, they knew that they had uncovered something truly terrifying. The legend of the ghost in the attic was real, and its presence still haunted the abandoned town. To this day, the old town remains abandoned, and the legend of the ghost in the attic continues to live on. Some say that the spirit of the tall, shadowy figure still lingers in the town, seeking revenge on those who dare to enter the old house. and the memory of the ghost in the attic continues to serve as a warning to anyone who would dare to explore the haunted and forgotten places of the world. Story 3. The Possessed Mirror. Jenna had just moved into her new apartment, and as she was unpacking her boxes, she noticed a large mirror leaning against the wall. It was an old antique piece with ornate gold framing, and despite its age, it looked well taken care of. Jenna decided to hang the mirror in her bedroom, above the dresser. She thought it would add a touch of elegance to her new living space. But as she was staring at her reflection, she noticed something strange. Her reflection seemed to be moving on its own, as if it was alive. Jenna tried to look away, but she found herself unable to break the gaze of the mirror. As she watched, her reflection began to contort and twist, as if it was being controlled by something else. Jenna felt a chill run down her spine, and she knew that something was wrong with the mirror. Over the next few days, Jenna began to experience strange occurrences in her apartment. Objects would move on their own, and she could hear strange noises coming from the walls. She began to feel as if she was being watched, even when she was alone in the apartment. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, Jenna caught a glimpse of her reflection in the mirror. But this time, her reflection was not alone. There was a dark figure standing behind her, its eyes glowing red. Jenna tried to look away, but she found herself unable to break the gaze of the mirror. She watched in horror as the figure in the mirror began to move, as if it was trying to break through the glass. Jenna knew that she had to get rid of the mirror, but she couldn't bring herself to touch it. She felt as if it was calling out to her, urging her to keep it in the apartment. Over the next few days, the strange occurrences in Jenna's apartment began to escalate. She would wake up in the middle of the night, feeling as if something was sitting on her chest, making it impossible for her to breathe. One night, Jenna woke up to find the mirror standing at the foot of her bed. Its reflection was no longer just her own, but instead, a dark figure was standing behind her, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly energy. Jenna tried to scream, but she found that she couldn't make a sound. She was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even look away from the mirror. And then, just as suddenly as before, the figure vanished, leaving Jenna alone in her apartment, shaking and terrified. Jenna knew that she had to get rid of the mirror before it was too late. She contacted a paranormal investigator, hoping that they would be able to help her. The investigator arrived at the apartment, armed with state-of-the-art equipment and years of experience. But as soon as they walked into the room with the mirror, they knew that something was wrong. The mirror seemed to be emanating a dark energy, and the investigator could feel a chill running down their spine. They tried to communicate with the spirit inside the mirror, but they were met with only silence. Finally, the investigator decided to take drastic measures. They broke the mirror, hoping to release the spirit trapped inside. As soon as the mirror shattered, Jenna felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The strange occurrences in her apartment came to an end, and she felt as if she was finally free. But as she looked at the shattered remains of the mirror, she knew that she would never forget the terror that had come with it. The memory of the possessed mirror would haunt her for years to come, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the most unexpected of places. Jenna thought that she had put the incident behind her, but as time passed, she began to notice that she was still being watched. She would see shadows move across the walls, and she could feel a presence in the room with her, even when she was alone. It wasn't until she moved out of the apartment and into a new home that she realized the true extent of the mirror's power. No matter where she went, she could feel the presence of the mirror, as if it was following her. Jenna knew that she needed to get rid of the mirror once and for all. She contacted the investigator again, hoping that they would be able to help her. The investigator arrived at Jenna's new home, and they could feel the dark energy emanating from the mirror even before they entered the room. They tried to communicate with the spirit, but again, they were met with only silence. Finally, the investigator decided that there was only one way to destroy the mirror for good. They performed a ritual, calling upon the spirits to help them banish the evil trapped inside the mirror. As the ritual came to an end, the mirror began to shake violently. Jenna watched in horror as cracks began to form on the surface. And then, with a final burst of energy, the mirror shattered into a million pieces. The room was silent, and Jenna felt as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she felt truly free. But as she looked at the shattered remains of the mirror, she realized that the evil trapped inside was not completely gone. She knew that it would always be a part of her, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk within even the most innocent-looking objects. From that day forward, Jenna knew to be cautious of the objects she brought into her home, and she always kept an eye out for any signs of darkness lurking just beneath the surface. She knew that the experience with the possessed mirror had changed her forever, and she would never forget the terror that had come with it. Despite the shattered mirror, Jenna continued to experience strange occurrences in her home. Objects would move on their own, doors would slam shut, and she could feel a cold breeze even when all the windows were closed. She knew that the evil from the mirror had not left her home, and she feared for her safety. Jenna tried to contact the investigator, but they did not answer her calls. Desperate for help, she turned to a local psychic. The psychic confirmed that there was still a dark presence in her home and advised her to perform a cleansing ritual. Jenna followed the instructions the psychic gave her, but as she finished the ritual, the darkness grew stronger. The objects in the room began to move more violently, and Jenna could hear whispers in the shadows. She knew that she needed to leave the house, but as she reached for the doorknob, she felt a force pull her back. The room grew darker, and she could feel something cold and slimy wrap around her ankles. Jenna screamed for help, but her voice was drowned out by the whispers of the dark spirits. She struggled to break free, but the more she fought, the tighter the grip around her ankles became. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in the darkness. Jenna looked up to see the investigator standing in the doorway, holding a cross and a vial of holy water. With a few words of prayer, the investigator banished the dark spirits and freed Jenna from their grasp. Jenna collapsed onto the floor, trembling and crying. The investigator helped Jenna out of the house and explained that the mirror had been a conduit for dark spirits to enter her home. Even though the mirror had been destroyed, the evil had lingered and grown stronger. Jenna was grateful for the investigator's help and vowed to never underestimate the power of the supernatural again. She knew that she had narrowly escaped the clutches of the dark spirits and was relieved to have finally found peace. But even after the cleansing ritual, Jenna could still feel a dark presence around her, reminding her that the mirror's curse had left a lasting impact on her life. From that day forward, she made sure to always be vigilant and protect herself from the forces of evil that can lurk in the most unexpected places.